So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, Tito.
Caught me with a big bite of chicken in my mouth. So I don't usually write notes, but thank you, Dan. Sweetheart. I was going to go out to Dan's yesterday. I figured he'd be there. I was going to walk up to him and ask him if he'd be my Valentine. So a lot of you know that I'm a geophysicist and geologist with a minor in math. And so because of that, if you've ever known any geologists, they have a different scale of time of most people because you study these like large segments of time and geologic formations and stuff. And so I think that everything's made out of stardust. I really do. In fact, I know that everything's made out of stardust. The stuff that we breathe and that we drink in and piss out, that it just comes through us, and we're really just ideas going through time. And the interesting thing is somebody can come around and change your idea of who you are or who you think you are. So anyway, we'll see if I can do that to you tonight. So I started off, first of all, I guess I should get the elephant out of the room. So I think I've got like 7 or 8 class action lawsuits against me right now for being handmade. My congressman told me that, congratulations, my friend, you've made it. I thought, gee, that's really funny, isn't it? I've often thought that business is kind of like climbing a mountain or a hillside, like these guys that just got through climbing that face, like you're rock climbing, and you get to the top, and you sit down, and you're looking at the valley below, and the breeze is going through your hair, and you look at your hands, they're all bloody and everything, and you're going, fuck, I made it. And you sit there and you think, God, man, I made it. And then finally you catch your breath and everything, and you start getting hungry, and you want to drink, and you stand up, and you turn around, and there's a saber-toothed tiger. And you go, these things aren't supposed to exist anymore. And there's just some new big problem at that level of business that you're doing. I ran into a guy on an airplane, told me that what that is, some professor somewhere explained them to. He said it's like a biological curve, and you go up and then you level out as you get to a new level of complexity, but that if you're willing to spend the time and the money, then you can just keep going up. So I'm happy to say that I'm going to attempt to defend. I think I've got a good argument that I distill with a pot still that I don't build them myself on site, but I design them and I sit there and tell everybody how to do it. But I got a whole team of people that build these things. I build all my alcohol filters, and sometimes I change them. And I build them all myself on site, and I try to make vodka that's at a reasonable price that people like, and that most of all I enjoy drinking. So I grew up in San Antonio. I went to Alamo Heights. I went to University of Texas, and then went back to San Antonio. I'd worked on oil rigs, and I'd gotten degrees in geology, geophysics. Worked for an oil field company. Worked for a seismic data processing company. Got transferred down to South America to run heliportable dynamite seismic crews for Western Atlas International. I did that for 3.5 years, and thought that I'd lived 7 lifetimes during that 3.5 years. And then I started a drilling company. And the oil business went down. I moved to Austin, worked for an environmental company, and ultimately for a mortgage company. And then rates went up a couple of points. I'd been making Christmas presents for my friends since 1990. And I came home from a keg party in which somebody had called me the vodka guy. And I had a few beers in me. And a guy was on TV that said that if you're trying to figure out what to do with your life, you take a sheet of paper and you draw a line down the middle. And on one side, you list what you love to do. And on the other side, you list what you're good at. And then you wrap a job around that. And I was feeling a little creative and turned over my resume and I put, I like to party. I like people. I like to be around pretty girls. I like the air conditioning. I like going to resorts and beaches and skiing and casinos, and I like being in bars. And on the other side, I was good in science and engineering and sales. And I looked at it and I thought, I should get in the liquor business. I'm Scottish, Irish, German, Welsh, and Polish. I'm just built for it, and my last name is Beveridge with a ridge at the end, and I've caught shit for it ever since I was a little kid, ever since I showed up at kindergarten and as a 4-year-old. So anyway, so I made the list, and then I made my business plan. I went down to a liquor store, and I had made some infusions. I bought cheap stuff, and they ran me out of the place. I put it back in my truck and came back in. They go, "What are you trying to do? You're trying to get me to lose my license? What's wrong with you, boy?" And I was like, "What? I was just trying to show you the stuff. I want you to sell this liquor I'm gonna make." And the guy's like, "You can't just make liquor and bring it into a liquor store." And I'm like, "Where else are you supposed to sell it? They don't, And the guy goes, "No, there's this whole deal, man. There's you got to get permits and stuff. There's a whole distribution thing and blah, 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 blah." And he goes, "And besides that, you got to do something that those flavored vodka." And at this point, this was like 1993, and at this point, Stoli had come out with 10 flavors, and they just sat there. And he's like, "I'm going to go look at the dust on those Stoli flavored vodkas. I'm going to end up drinking that blueberry shit." And so we looked at the vodka section, and in the end, I decided that the guy had told me that if you could make a vodka that was really, really smooth, then people might buy it, but that you have all these multinational billion-dollar companies and stuff, and they're not going to let you just walk on in. So I did a business plan. And this is pre-internet, so I went to University of Texas. They'd come out with these new things called CD-ROMs, and I'd never seen one. And so I got on that CD-ROM and I just burned it up. And I, as researching the liquor business, what I realized was that the boutique winery thing had been going on kind of since the mid '80s. They started doing these boutique wineries, and then they started doing these microbreweries up in kind of the Pacific Northwest. And so I thought, well, it'd be cool to do a micro distillery. And there weren't any hits for micro distillery on the CD-ROM, but I did find small batch bourbons. And so I thought that there were these little pot still bourbon makers in Kentucky, and I thought, well, I'll just do a pot still vodka because all the girls that I knew liked drinking vodka. And I liked it too. So I ended up thinking since those guys could do these little pot still bourbon distilleries, little pot still distilleries like Knob Creek and Baker's or Booker's and, those little pot still distilleries. And so I didn't really know my head from my ass at all when I got into this thing. So I wrote a business plan. I said I was going to go back to the old pot still. That was how everything was done pre-Civil War. And there hadn't been, nobody was using pot stills anymore. And so I had this idea that a book that I read said that if you're not first or second in your category, make a new category. So I came up with this idea to make what I call the craft, artisanal, handmade micro distillery. And I had a plan to do all kinds of whiskeys and gin and flavors and brandy and everything in 3 different levels, including a value one. And I had big plans, and I got in the business and realized that I just knew nothing about it. I didn't know anything. But I did write this business plan that had all this artisanal craft, handmade, and I was thinking, is this, boutique, micro deal. And so I ended up going to research the whole vodka category, and there were guys like Michel Roux doing Absolute, and Maurice Canbar did Sky, and he was like an inventor that came up with like stuff on TV, like Jinsu knives and stuff, and he came up with Sky Vodka. I thought that was cool. And then Dave Vandevelde was this guy that did Kettle One. And when I was in the oil field working in Venezuela, I worked with these guys that had been in Saudi Arabia and Libya and Oman, and they're Muslim countries, and they don't let you have alcohol. And all these guys are from Texas and Louisiana and Australia. And so they would show up to go to the Aramco building with suitcases of like nutrients and yeast, turbo yeast, and wood chips and like flavorings and stuff. And then they would go there, and they would go to the grocery store and get sugar and cornmeal and cans of frozen grape juice concentrate. And they'd make beer and liquor, and then they'd make this real high-end moonshine, and because they're all scientists and engineers. And then they would, according to them, they'd flavor them and do all kinds of stuff. And so I decided I was going to build a pot still. So I researched, and I found out that there were some companies, Prulot, Forsyth, and Vendome, and I decided which one I wanted, and it ended up that for my little prototype still, it was $75,000 in like 1994. And so I went, well, I don't have that. And so I got a beer keg from the recycling plant, and then I built a swan neck, and I ended up just making it out of that and putting it on a catfish boiler, and I got some copper tubing from Home Depot, and I started brewing in these 6.5-gallon carboys, that are like water jugs at an office. And I tried it out of wheat, and I tried sugar. I tried all kinds of sugars because I didn't know what I was doing. Tried all kinds of sugars, and then I tried sorghum and rye and barley, and I just kind of went through the list of all the grains and potatoes, and I just like corn the best, just personal preference, and so I started kind of deciding, okay, I'm going to do this. I made a business plan, and I raised no money. I spent like 6 months trying to sell it, and I came up with nothing. So I went to go lease a place, and nobody would lease to me because as the environmental tank pulling thing had happened, and they weren't leasing anything to anybody with chemicals, so I couldn't do that. And so I didn't really know kind of how to build a still exactly. So I went to the library, and there weren't any books. It's like they'd done a book burning after Prohibition. And I went down to the Institute of Texan Cultures in San Antonio to see what distilleries there'd been in Texas, and it ended up that there hadn't ever been a legal distillery in Texas. But they had all these pictures of moonshiners that the Texas Rangers were destroying their stills with sledgehammers, and right before they'd destroy the still, they'd pose for the camera for the San Antonio Light, And all these pictures were in so I built a still that was kind of right in between all those pictures. And anyway, so I couldn't get any investors, couldn't find a place to lease, so I ended up finding the cheapest piece of dirt in Travis County, which was out in the kind of the bad swelling clays on the Mexican rodeo side of town. And I bought 12 3/4 acres for 33 grand, and I gave him a $3,000 credit card check, and I talked the guy into financing it 10 years, 10% at $407 a month. And I bought this land in '95, and ended up building a shack on it. And when I say I built a shack, I met this homeless guy through my Uncle Filthy, and he lived with me for about a year and a half. And if I got him food and gave him $20 for a date every now and then, and get him keep him in Jim Beam and Pearl Beer, he'd do anything. And then I learned how to do a low pressure dosage septic system, and I got a ditch witch and did it, and ditch witch and dug the water. I did all the plumbing on it. I did all the electrical on it. I didn't have any money for explosion-proof pumps or anything, and so I took aluminum windows and I put tempered glass in them. I had tempered glass cut for them, and I shined floodlights through the windows, and that was my explosion-proof environment. I was chain hoisting barrels to the ceiling and gravity draining them, and I'd gone to the TABC, and they're just like, well, you can't do it. And I'm like, well, why not? And it's like, well, because you can't. You can just do beer and wine here. And I go, well, why not? And they go, well, because of the code. And I'm like, well, what code? And so in the environmental business, I had dealt a bunch with the federal code, the CFRs, because they were changing the laws so much in the early 90s when I worked there. Ultimately, I read the code, and I went back to TABC and told them that they'd made a mistake, and that I'd read the code. And the guy's like, you read the code? I'm like, yeah. Did you? And he's like, no, man, nobody reads the code. And he was like, that's like legal, man. And so he bumped me to legal, and they told me that if I got a permit from the BATF, that they'd give me a permit in Texas. So I went to the BATF, and I told them I wanted to be a distillery, and they told me I couldn't. I said, well, why not? And they go, man, distilleries have like 6 people in compliance. And I mean, they have like 6 people in the company just to deal with us. And I was like, well, I can't get anybody to invest in this thing. And, but where's it saying in the code that I can't do it? And they're like, oh, no, man, you can't be an individual doing a distillery. And I said, yeah. And I go, well, what code do you go by? And they're CFRs, CFR 27. So I got a copy of the CFR 27. I read all the relevant alcohol parts. And it ended up that he was right. You couldn't be a person because you had to be a corporation. So I went down to the Secretary of State here in Austin, and I incorporated. My friend gave me this name, 5th Generation Incorporated, because I was always telling everybody when they'd ask me if I grew up in Austin, I go, no, I'm 5th generation San Antonian. And then my buddy is like, and you're trying to raise money, and it makes you sound like you've been around for a while because it's 5th generation, and you're going to generate fifths. And I'm like, damn, that's good, man. I like that. So anyway, that's why I'm 5th generation. So I got this place, I built it, I got permitted. The ATF came 10 times. And when I say 10 times, I mean not 9, but 10 times. And I was just like, look, you can't keep me from doing this. I made it all the way through everything in the code. You got to give me my permit. And so the regional director of the BATF came down and herself and said, yeah, all right. And so I started up, and it wasn't like 3 weeks later, I had a full audit. And I'm a one-man show. with a full audit. So just completely just shuts me down. I'm like taking barrels out of a sea container I have for a warehouse and back and having to put them on a scale, you know, weigh them in front of them, take a sample of each one, go through the gauging manual on every single thing in that warehouse. So I did that. I got to find a distributor, and I went down to Eddie Block in San Antonio that now is Republic. He was a friend of my cousin in San Antonio, and us San Antonio boys, we stick together. And my cousin's like, yeah, man, you know, my buddy Eddie, I'll get him to take you on, you know. I mean, that's what he does. That's what his family does. And so then Eddie was like, no. I had a meeting with him. He's like, no, man, no, we're not interested. I had a guy I'd worked in the environmental business was my partner. We're going to go 50-50 in this distillery, and we're going to close it down, the physical thing, and I'd do my vodka, and then we'd shut it down, and then close out the books, and then he'd do his brandy. And he ended up, he didn't do anything, and in the end, when I was coming out with my vodka, he told me that half of my vodka was his, and that we didn't have anything in writing, and that I was so broke that I had to do what he said. And so I ended up taking some antidepressants, and I came back and told him to go fuck himself. That I'd build another fucking distillery without him. And it'd be a lot easier the second time, since I've done every fucking thing. So Republic wouldn't take me on. Went to Glazers, they wouldn't take me on. I came back to Block, he wouldn't take me on. Went back and forth like 9 times, and finally, over the course of months, 6 months, finally Glazers said that they'd take me on. I sent out deals for 500 invitations to liquor stores and bars. Invited all the news crews for the opening of the first legal distillery in the history of Texas. And 3 days before the grand opening, Glazer called me and said that they changed their mind. And I went to Twin Liquors on Bee Cave Road, and the guy goes, I was afraid they were going to do that. And I was just like, shit. And he goes, after a while, I go, what do I do? And he's like, man, they got you. They just screwed you from the beginning. And after a while, he goes, you know, there was a guy in here that was going to sell some Jermaine Robin. And then he had a wine company. Block wouldn't take him, and Glazers wouldn't take him. There was a wine company in Houston that I think was going to get their liquor license. If I can think of who it was, I'll give you his number. So there's like no cell phones, right? I'm like checking my machine all the time, you know. And he calls and he gives me this guy's broker's name. I call the broker. The guy's like, give me $5 a case. So you got $5 a case. He calls the Grand Cru, and the day of the grand opening, at the grand opening, I met Grand Cru after I'd done 2 TV interviews, and I didn't have a distributor. So I went to mediation with my partner. He ended up with 1/8 of the company and $5 a case for the first 64,000 cases. And it's amazing how that last $5 really, really hurts. It's like all the gravy when you're starting a distillery. So I built a 175-gallon still and did my grand opening. And by then I had 18 credit cards. I'd lied on them. I didn't know. I just thought that there wasn't any debtor's prison or anything. And I paid them all off eventually. But anyway, so we have a video right now. Are we ready to play the video thing? Yeah? Well, let's play that thing. Hi, I'm Tito Beverage. I make Tito's handmade vodka here in Austin, Texas. This is a micro distillery. I like a boutique winery or microbrewery. We're probably the only one in the country. We distill our vodka 6 times. It's made by corn in a pot still. You'll see a lot of stuff on a few of these tapes that we're going to roll here in a second. Briefly, I'm going to give you a 1-800 number if you guys want to call sometime and get some signs. We've got some metal signs. Pull your pen out, and you can get one of these or one of these. We have shelf talkers and shot glasses and coasters and all kinds of stuff. Just give us a call. Basically, we're the one of the only companies that uses a pot still in the world, and I think it makes for a superior product. The Spirit Journal rated us 4 stars. Bar Nightclub magazine says we can go head-to-head with any of the world's greats and not break a sweat. Texas Monthly calls it so luxuriously smooth. Let's see, we had one spirit critic call it a homegrown symphonic spirit to applaud. So y'all watch some of these tapes, and we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
It's the first legal and only distillery in Texas, and it's bubbling away in the hill country.
And the man who started it is hoping to do for vodka what microbreweries have done for beer. Fox reporter Tim Ryan has his story.
It's about 10 miles from the middle of nowhere, and that is just the way Tito Beverage likes it. Nice and quiet. All the better to hear the gentle trickle of handmade Texas vodka as it makes its way from the still to the bottle.
I've made a big list of what kind of job I thought would be a good job to have. Any bar I go to, it's like R&D. Go to Club Med, a little R&D. Thinking, man, what a good job.
He made his first batch of vodka for some friends. They liked it so much they urged him to make more. First, this former oil company geologist had to navigate a maze of state and federal regulations.
This is actually the first legal distillery, well, the only one and the first one in the history of Texas.
Tito does a lot of the work himself, and being the owner of a distillery is not as glamorous as he thought it would be. So far, no scouting trips to Club Med.
It's kind of boring, sometimes you're just sitting out here, watching that thing bubble away,
He humbly calls it the best vodka in the world. And when you read the label, handmade, it is not any marketing gimmick.
And that was Tim Ryan reporting. The owner of the distillery says it took him 20 years of planning to create his little spot in the hill country.
Not a little history is being made right here in the state of Texas.
Yeah, but it's not the kind of thing that's going to shake the world, but it might change your taste buds and the way people think about vodka. Now, if you're a little confused about all that, here's Daniel Plant with an explanation.
If this were a different day and age, right now the lawman would be banging down the door with a sharp axe. But this is the 90s, and for the first time in Texas history, one cowboy is cooking up a batch of liquor and has a license to do it.
Running right here, Austin, Texas, God's country.
After years of testing and tasting, the man they call Tito has finally figured out the right recipe.
The alcohol will boil off into vapor.
And what a vapor it is. Tito's Texas handmade vodka is now ready for tasting. What better way than right out of the bottle?
It's very smooth. I mean, it's very smooth.
And it should be. This stuff is handcrafted, hand-poured, and Tito even does the labels by hand.
You take one of these?
If this looks primitive to you, you're right. In fact, Tito's operation looks a lot like the old moonshiners, only Tito has a degree in science and a license to sell.
From these photos you can see on the wall, there are like quite a few incidents with the Texas Rangers confiscating stills and whatnot.
That won't happen here. Everything is above board and ready to roll.
Tito's Texas handmade vodka. First and only distillery in Texas. Yeehaw!
Texas is known for lots of things, oil, cattle, and football among them. It is not, however, known for the production of liquor.
Until just lately, there wasn't a single distillery anywhere in the state, at least not a legal one. But out on the porch tonight, Jim Swift tells us the Austin-based fifth-generation company is about to introduce an unusual product in the land of Willie's Whiskey River.
Although the Austin city limits are just a couple of miles to the north, we are, nonetheless, in the boondocks. A fellow by the name of, believe it or not, Tito Beverage is throwing a little party. He is celebrating the birth of a baby he has named Tito's Handmade Texas Vodka. Vodka?
Well, doing whiskey, you have to build the aging warehouses, and then you have to buy all the barrels, and then you have to let it sit for like 5 or 6 years, you know, or 8 years, or...
A lot of interest piled up on that credit card in that time, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. My credit cards have taken about all they can stand, you know. I'm back down to the white ones now, you know, no more platinums and golds. They're not sending me those anymore.
In fact, Beveridge scoured the proverbial jungle looking for investors willing to rain down on his head a cascading waterfall of money, roughly 18 million bucks or so. He planned to use the money to build a full-scale Texas whiskey distillery. Instead of the waterfall, all he got was a drip, a drop, a dribble, here and there. So, Beveridge decided to create his own waterfall, a vodka still. Or rather, a vodka spill. Using his own savings and around $45,000 in credit card charges, he built his still out of anything he could make work.
My customer will probably be a high-end vodka consumer. People that drink like Kettle One and Stoli and Absolute and you know, maybe some Sky, and you know, maybe get some Smirnoff people to upgrade.
Now, if that smacks of overconfidence, remember this. We are dealing with a Texas boy.
I've done a lot of international traveling and stuff, and people think of Texans as different than people from anywhere else in the world. And I'm going to get a bunch of people switching over. Tito's Texas, handmade vodka. First and only distillery in Texas, right here in Austin, Texas. Yeehaw!
Out on the porch, Jim Swift, News 36.
Pretty funny, isn't it? Now, don't you guys wish that you had a bottling rig like that? Because let me tell you, you too can have a bottling machine like that. Pretty funny. Thank you. So back then, you had to, for all your waste, you had to do voluntary destructions. And so every time you do a voluntary destruction, so the BATF would just show up. Like you'd be working, you'd have plans, you'd have trucks coming, they just show up, and you'd shut down everything, and then go through everything in that warehouse and gauge everything. And it would take you all day long. And then when you had to destroy something because your bond was so low, you had to get rid of some proof gallons on your bond. You do a voluntary destruction. You have to give the ATF and San Antonio notification. They'd come all day long and watch you burn a half barrel of alcohol that I would feed from a little pipe at the bottom, and it'd just burn all day long, and I'd burn it off, and they'd stay there all day. And then a lot of times they just audit me and make me go through everything in my warehouse all day long. And so I didn't have any employees, and I would go out and do ride-withs. And so the first time I did a ride-with, I was with this wine company, and the guy like sells a white and he sells a red, and he goes, "Tito, you're on." And so I just kind of got the bottle like that and started just copying him, right? You know, and go around. I do these ride-withs, and I'd listen to the people, to the liquor salesman. I'd listen to the guys from the liquor store, and they go, "No, I don't need any of that." And I'm like, "Look, this is the first." And he goes, "I don't care if it's the first whatever. It's like vodka should not be made in Texas, first of all, and I don't need any bathtub, vodka going to make somebody go blind." And I'm like, "No, this is really good. It's made in a pot still." And he's like going, "Look, man, this looks like moonshine, man. This stuff's going to make people blind. No way." And I'm like, "Here, just try it." We'd open it up, we'd taste it, and they'd go, "Well, I don't drink vodka." I go, "Well, somebody around here drinks vodka," and they'll be like, "Cheryl," it's like 9 o'clock in the morning, Cheryl would come over and drink it and say it's smooth, and they'd buy 3 bottles, and I'd be in, like Longview, Texas or something, and I'd be like, "Man, come on, you're the biggest store here, just buy like 3 cases." Like, "No, 3 bottles." Specs here in town started with 3 bottles with me at their Houston store. I asked him a couple years ago what if he remembers how much he bought for me the first time. He said 3 bottles, and he's right. So I'd gotten married, and then my wife, I married a redhead, and but she dyed her hair blonde up top, and so I thought I was getting involved with a blonde, and until it's too late, you know, and so I didn't stay married long, and had a kid, and so the next thing I knew, I'm running a distillery by myself as a single dad with a 2-year-old half the time, and then I do, like, when I didn't have them, I'd go on the road and do ride with, and I didn't have any money, so I'd have to prepay for all my materials. And so then I'd like prepay, I'd load a truck by hand. I didn't have a forklift. I'd put a pallet on it and throw the pallet jack, get the truck driver to help me lift up the pallet jack and put it on there. I'd wrap them, build them and wrap them, you know, take off the pallet jack. And then I'd wait for 30 days to get paid. And so I'd sit there just broke. And on my credit cards, I would take the white part where the signatures are, and I'd put, like, however much the card was, like 8K. And I'd put the intro rate, like 1.9. I'd put when it was going to blow up, you know, like next November or something. And I'd write it on the back in the white space. And so I'd pay my bills every month. I'd go through them. And the one that's getting ready to blow up, I'd throw it over to the side. I'd go through all the mail. I'd apply for all the credit cards that came in. Whatever cards came in, I'd transfer the one that was blowing up to that one. And then if I had any left over, I'd ask them for credit card checks. And then I'd cash the full amount for the credit card check, put it in my personal account, and I'd pay my rent, my mortgage, and stuff like that. So I had a 2-year-old out there. He's 17 now. He recently explained to me that why he'd come in and help me put caps on and help me bottle, because there was a really scary part in Scooby-Doo that every time he'd get to that he'd have to run into the still room where I was. He wants to be a distiller, and I have him working on the bottling line. And he's made it up to mechanic. But he's 17, I won't let him go in the still room. He's pissed. So I had this wine distributor, and at one point, and I was always like giving away vodka, trying to get people to drink it. And so I'd give vodka to the guy that ran the point of sale thing at our distributor, my little wine distributor I was with in Houston. And I'd been down there, you know, a bunch of times, and I always give him a bottle when I'm down there. And then he started acting all sheepish and stuff. I'm like, what? I'm like, dude, just cough it out, man. You'll feel so much better. And he told me that all my point of sale was in the trash. And the head of the wine distributor kept telling me the reason we weren't selling is because he didn't have, like, shelf talkers and stuff. So I spent all my money to print these things. And I'd design them. I'd print them. I'd make them, you know, at Kinko's. And then I'd go and I'd give them to give all this, you know, money to him, you know, in the form of point of sale. And he knew I was coming down there and that I was going to complain that all the point of sale was still in there and that he had lied to me. And he had the guy throw it all in the trash. And so we got in a big to-do. And he told me to go screw myself and get another distributor, maybe somebody with, you know, girls with little short black dresses like Republic or like Block or Glazer. And by then I'd befriended all the chains in Texas, and they liked me, and so they put my stuff at eye level and helped me. And so Glazer took me on, the same Glazer that had blown me off 3 days before my grand opening. So, you know, forgive and remember. You know, they've turned out to be great partners, you know, but, you know, I mean, you got to do what you got to do, and it's actually worked out to be a very loving relationship. In 1998, I went to WSWA, and they're still having it in San Francisco. And I'm sitting there, and of course, I'm sending my own stuff, you know, there. I'm like setting up my booth. I'm working the booth. This guy comes up from Jim Beam and asked me where I got the idea to make vodka in a pot still. And I said, well, I'd seen these boutique wineries and, you know, these microbreweries, and then I saw these little pot still bourbon makers in Kentucky. And he goes, yeah, like what? And I said, like Booker's and Baker's and Knob Creek. And And the guy goes, those are my babies. And I'm like, dude, you're the one that's like runs all those little distilleries? Are you kidding me? And he's like, man, that's all Jim Beam. I go, what do you mean? He goes, it's like Jim Beam that we put in a sherry cask for a while, Jim Beam that we do at cask proof, Jim Beam that we put 25 barrels together. You know, it's just all Jim Beam. I said, well, who are all the little distilleries? And he goes, man, I've been in this business for 30 years, and you're the only one I've ever heard of. And I felt like the world opened up and that I fell down to China. Do you know how stupid that is, to sit there and think that there's little pot still bourbon distilleries in Kentucky, and so you start a vodka distillery and then there really aren't? How's that for a brain fart? So when you're bottling by yourself, you know that labeling, is just, and this is so there weren't these adhesive labels, there's not labels like there are now, that are on stickers and stuff. They're just all paper, and you had to put like Elmer's glue on the back. And it'd take you half your time to just put the labels on. So one day, and I'd get people to come out and help me, and it'd be like what I learned was you go to the work corner. If you have to go to Home Depot first and you show up late, you only get like old white drunks. And I learned that how you deal with that, because you need somebody to help you, how you deal with that is when you're bottling, you give them a shot glass and you tell them that they can drink all that they want as long as they stay sober enough to keep bottling, because if they get too drunk to bottle, that you're going to pay them and they're going to have to go out to the street, and it's 14 miles to town. And so they would sit there, and then all of a sudden, they're all drinking and everything's good, and and they keep bottling and they do a good job. And then the conversation always goes to jail food. I don't know why, but it just is always about this jail, the food's this, and this, jail that. So one day I had a buddy of mine helping me out, and he's going, man, this kind of reminds me of working at the MHMR in the laundry section up in Abilene. I'm like, what's MHMR? And he goes, like, it's like mental health, mental retardation. I'm like, so you did the laundry there? And he goes, man, I go, how much laundry do they have? And they go, no, they farm it out. Like, they do it for companies and stuff, and then they do the laundry there, and their clients get paid. And he's like, they stretch these Dr. Pepper bottles. They do all kinds of stuff. And I went, you think that they'd label vodka bottles? And they're like, well, if they weren't filled, they probably would. So I ended up sending a truckload of glass at a time to the MHMR near my house. And I would wake up in the morning, and I would go by the MHMR with the clients, and I would fit 77 cases of fifths in my Isuzu Trooper I paid $1,700 for, and I could still do the stick shift. But when you walk in the morning to the MHMR, it's a trip. But you'd stack up those bottles, and they're all labeled. But so in 2001, I got another audit, and this was like another full audit of everything, and I had 0 violations, and they said it was the first time they'd ever done an audit that was 0 violations. I mean, nothing. So my first year I did 1,000 cases. My second year, okay. So first of all, I had this idea, and I started making flavored vodkas in '90. I had this idea to do this and wrote a business plan in '93. I couldn't get a place to lease, and I finally bought a place in February '95. And then I finally started selling something in April of '97. And Anchor Glass wouldn't sell me glass. They wouldn't sell a pallet of glass, and they wanted me to buy a truckload, and I couldn't. So I called up the president of Anchor Glass, and the guy just blew me off. So my granddad told me that the CFO of a company writes the checks for the president. So I called up the CFO of Anchor Glass, and he goes, why are you calling me? I go, because he won't do anything about it, and I will never buy Anchor Glass for the rest of my life, ever, if you don't sell me glass right now. And he's like, I don't have any problem selling you glass. And so the CFO of Anchor Glass told them to sell me a pallet of glass from their Winchester plant. So then I built a warehouse, and my warehouse was, I got a beat-up box trailer, and I just parked it there at my place, and I built a wood ramp, and a truck would back up with my glass, and I'd go over with a pallet jack, and I'd put it on this other box trailer that was just sitting there on my property. And I'd store my glass there, and I'd come bring it down on a ramp and bring it in when I needed to bottle. And then once it's bottled, I'd stick it in the sea container. My first year, I did 1,000 cases. My first year being 97. I'm like 4 years into it by then. So first year, I did 1,000 cases. Second year, 2,000 cases. Third year, I did 3,000 cases. My fourth year, I did 4,000 cases. I was 8 years into it doing 4,000 cases. And then it jumped to 6, and then 17, 32, 58. In 2005, I did 100,000 cases, had 6 employees. We had hand bottled up to 32,000 cases a year. Then I needed a bottling line, and I ended up buying ADM, had been bottling their own stuff, and their clients were complaining that they're competing with them, and so they decided to shut down, and they had these mothball bottling lines, and I bought line B, which used to be a Jack Daniels line, and then Medley Distillers bought it from Jack after Jack had worn it out, and then Medley sold it to ADM, and then I bought it. And we broke more fucking glass on that line. I hate bottling lines. And so I at that point, had an audit in 2005 after 0 violations in 2001. I've got one product, and I do everything the same way. I got a audit, and it was right after the BATF went over to the Justice Department, and they had made the TTB in Treasury, where BATF was. And when they did that, all the guys went over to Justice, and they hired like a bunch of like accountants, and I think a bunch of them came, like Arthur Anderson, and they hired a bunch of people there that didn't really know anything about the liquor business, and evidently they were going to cut their teeth on me, and they came and said that I owed, at the end of the audit, they said I needed to change my brand name, that I had a bottling line, and that I owed them $3.5 million, of which at the time I had gotten, by that point I'd gotten a $100,000 line of credit from Merrill Lynch, and so I just had nothing but debt, and so I did this. I wrote a letter to Manfreda, and and he was they had just started the TTB, so this is December 19th, 2005, and it was a really long letter, and I sent it to him on December 19th, and by January 10th, I had not gotten a reply, and it was one of those ones, that you would expect a very quick reply, and I got no reply, and so it ended up that a friend of mine from up the street married a guy that ended up being a U.S. congressman, and so that helped. And so I CC'd Manfreda when I sent it to my congressman buddy, and so I'm just gonna paraphrase just a 2 paragraphs. It disturbs me greatly, and although my agents assure me that they are not trying to put me out of business, but it isn't over till it's over. I feel the future of my brand is being put in the hands of people who may not know how to use a gauging manual, take a batch to 80 proof, and especially the difference between a column still and a pot still. They may not even, not a jab at column stills, but they may not even know that there is a craft distilling movement going on in America. What happens to the small shop? What happens to the small shops whose owners are not good at reading federal code and good at math and science? I feel violated. Excuse me. I just felt violated. I drink Tito's water with a lemon. It's really good. Y'all should try one sometime. I've always run a tight operation, have all my documentation, all my records. I do full inventories every month instead of once a quarter. I have scales to 5 pounds when the regs say 10. I have every single bit of paperwork that I've ever been required to have and will comply. With any regulation anyone throws at me, no problem. Just don't find me for something I was instructed to do through 2 other audits. I've not changed my handcrafted process at all. I know the TTB understands about pot still handcrafted spirits. In closing, I hope the TTB reaches out and partners with the handcrafted spirits industry with responsiveness and fairness, not an efficient summary execution. We American distillers have a burden of compliance that all other nations of the world do not. Yet spirits from all over the globe are afforded the same access to our market, the greatest market in the world, without our burden of compliance. Is that not by itself a competitive disadvantage for Americans already? I will happily comply with anything regulatorily any way you want. I signed up for it when I decided to start a DSP. Just don't kill my brand. How's that? So I kept building stills. I'd have my friends come at night and after work, and in some states I couldn't get distributors for like 7 years straight. I couldn't get into their state. And so TTB did this audit. They found that I had 26 violations. I'd had none the prior audit. I had 26 violations, and part of it got to the point where they told me that unless I could get my proof right, that they're going to shut me down. I had 10 German hydrometers, the best hydrometers in the world, and I had 10 of them. And you could change one from the other, and they would read exactly the same. And the handbook says that you have to use a hydrometer. Well, they slipped a little deal in that they could use a DMA 5000 densitometer instead, but it doesn't give the same reading as a hydrometer. So I tracked down the guy that was the engineer for the DMA 5000 at Anton Par and had him send me an email of why there's a discrepancy. And I couldn't get anybody at the TTB to understand that the hydrometer glass swells. And so all the guy had to do for the DMA 5000 is at that temperature just make a correction for it, and it'd read exactly like a hydrometer. But he was like, mine's right, the hydrometer's wrong, you know. And I'm like, yeah, but the code says hydrometer, you know. So I lost it, and here I'm driving a $1,700 Trooper, and I had to buy a $29,000 DMA 5000 densitometer so that I would be exactly wrong like their lab in California. And the lady that was the head of the lab, she came out to my place and got the same readings with the hydrometer that I did, and just told me, look, you're just going to have to change it. So I went to the federal building in Dallas, and they had the head of compliance. They had the field head of field. They had the head attorney. They're like 7 guys. The head of the regional director, and I go to the federal building in Dallas, and I bring my helper with me. He went to Luling High School. He never graduated from college, but he was an underwear model at one point. And he did dig septics, you know, for a while. And he came with me, and I took that. We're wrapping it up? All right. So Leah told me I had all the time I wanted. I said, are you sure? She said, all the time you wanted. So sorry, Penn. So at the end of the deal at the federal building, it ended up that I went through the CFR 27 with all of them, and I got off of all 26 violations and paid no fine. So then Frank Coleman over at Discus was always trying to get me to do Discus, and I told him if he made a deal for craft distilleries, that was less money, that I'd join. And so he made it, but then by then I was doing too many cases, so I could never join. We still build our own stills, and we build all our own vodka filters. We're the first craft liquor for Glazer, Republic, Young, Southern, Wirtz, Charmer, a bunch of other ones. You know, I kind of had an idea of popularizing the pot still, but I tell you what, looking out here tonight at all you people, sitting there just thinking, man, this is just really unbelievable. I mean, I just feel like, you know, great lucky to have just, you know, figured that Jim Beam had made some little pot still distilleries and gotten that wrong. And it just ends up that this business, you know, whether you make a ton of money or not, is just the best business in the world. It's the hospitality industry. You make such great friends. If I had to give any of you guys any advice, I would say make stuff that you like, because you're going to drink a lot of it. Go small, have like low overhead, so your nut's kind of small, so you don't have to do all that many cases to make money. Grow organically. Buy lunch for your ride with. If people like you, they will help you. So be nice to everybody. Distributors are going to ignore you, and the only difference between a small distributor ignoring you and a big distributor ignoring you is the big distributor goes everywhere. So if you want to sell a case someplace, they go there if you can sell it. If you're going to pick a distributor, look at their competitors, look at your competitors' brands, and get the distributor that doesn't have your competitor. Don't talk trash about the competition. Just go by your own merits. And a brand without profit is a brand without honor. Make sure that you make money on your stuff. Don't get into trying to get cheapest in the hill. It's a losing battle. And just have fun. Let's all hold hands and move this whole craft distillery movement forward. Thank you so much. I hope that I changed your brain a little bit.